As UFOs captivate the world, society heavily relies on the mainstream media to offer accurate information. But do they? In 2019, the New York Times reported multiple naval encounters with UFOs. And although evidence exists, they did try to verify that on an official level. The Black Vault just received documents that show they may not have been able to do so. It's time for you to decide if you're hearing the whole truth. From my side, here's what I found out. Stay tuned. You're about to journey inside the Black Vault. That's right, everybody. As always, thank you so much for tuning in and making this your podcast or your live stream of choice. Now, I know that it has been a little bit since the last podcast, if you're streaming that, and a little bit shorter of a wait, but I know that there's been a delay on the YouTube channel as well. For that, I'm sincerely sorry. I have really, with this COVID situation, been schedule-wise just under the gun. I mean, it has been insanity with 2 kids, my wife working at a hospital, not trying to make excuses for you, but just at least explain a little bit about what in the world is going on. So I do apologize. I kind of see light at the end of the tunnel a little bit. Hopefully it's not a train, but hopefully that'll free up a little bit more time to do presentations like this. Now, I know that the last presentation you guys saw, the last podcast that you heard, was about the New York Times. Now, I hate to do back-to-back topics because this one is dealing with the New York Times as well. But as fate would have it, since then, about 2 months ago, my last broadcast, something new came in that I feel that you guys should be made aware of. The reason is because I have long harped on the media for accuracy in reporting, not only with UFOs, which is today's topic, but for those who follow the Black Vault, you'll know that I deal with all sorts of stuff, including UFOs, but that's now a very small percentage of what the entire archive is all about. Now, with the New York Times and their connection with UFOs, as you know from the last broadcast and presentation, there was a lot of problems. Well, recently I just received documentation from the Navy through the Freedom of Information Act, which actually sheds light on the New York Times and on their reporting and on their lack of reporting. Now, I'm not going to put too much opinion in this. I know some people really don't like me pointing out these discrepancies, erroneous facts that are put out there in the news media, but it is critical to understanding the UFO phenomena, the media, how it's reported, and what we should and shouldn't believe. Now, I'll say up front, I am not a skeptic or debunker, though I am skeptical. I also want to point out, as I have many times before, because if you're new to this channel and you don't know my background, I am a firm believer that whatever this phenomena is, it's real and deserves attention. It also deserves fair reporting, because for me, who has lived government secrets now for about 24 years of my life, I believe wholeheartedly that there is a lot to this story. And you all who haven't lived it for 24 years of your life, or don't look into it as much as I do because I'm fascinated by it, you deserve to hear the whole story. Not tidbits, not little bits here and there, but rather the entire picture. That's what I aim to do today, and zeroing in on the documents that I just obtained and really kind of made a discovery that was confusing to me. Now, I'm throwing the title out there, The New York Times and the Unreported UAP Encounters. Well, what in the world does that mean? Well, these FOIA documents revealed an inside look at how some of the New York Times stories came together, and how some never came to be. Now, I'm interested in your thoughts as I go through this. So please, if you're listening on a podcast, I would love it if you could give a review. That's a very, very helpful thing to do. But if you're watching on YouTube, down below, there's the comment section, and let me know why you think the New York Times did not report on what we now know that they had at the time they were reporting on other UFO-related issues. Now, let me give you guys just a little bit of background. There was an article that appeared on May 12th, 2020, from the Drive's War Zone. Now, if you guys aren't familiar with the War Zone, you gotta be. I mean, if you like the stuff that the Black Vault covers with military history and military aircraft and technology and advances and science and stuff like that, you have to follow Tyler Rogoway and Joseph Trevithick on Twitter, who's very, very active, but also follow their website. They do amazing journalism. They really do. They are lengthy, detailed articles diving in on all sorts of things. They periodically do UFO-related or UAP-related reports, but really they're just more of a defense industry website and give coverage to those types of topics. And it really is awesome. And I'm not just saying that. Tyler has been a guest on my show. I recommend you guys, if you're interested in his background, dig into that because it was a great interview. But no matter what, if you dig those topics, this is a place to follow. And I wanted to highlight one of their articles on May 12th, 2020 of this year. Here are the Navy pilot reports from encounters with mysterious aircraft off the East Coast. Now, their article was just that. They had detailed about 8 different cases from the United States Navy that they had obtained under the Freedom of Information Act. Anytime that I see triumphs like this through FOIA, whether it be UFO related or not, I give my absolute thumbs up and kudos to those involved, in this case, Tyler and Joseph over there. Both, again, great individuals, investigative reporters. They put together this article and really went into detail on each of the hazard reports and near encounters with U.S. Navy pilots and unidentified aerial phenomena, whatever they may be. Now, when you read through it, and I won't go through them, this here, if you're watching this show, you'll see they give you maps and graphics to really kind of outline what they're talking about and what they're showing. So what they did was they broke down these 8, and one statement that I want to read to you is this. What is also puzzingly absent from this group of documents are any reports that occurred in the late 2014 to mid-2015 timeframe. Now, there wasn't a lot of elaboration on this by the Drive, but this is an example of that excellent piece of journalism where if you follow this story, you'll know what they were referring to in the sense that there should have been some kind of records between that time frame to tie into the New York Times reporting. Now, the Drive did mention that. I mean, they didn't just throw a left curve, but they didn't go into great detail about it. But this is what they were looking for, which was the stories that were printed on May 26th of 2019 by the New York Times profiling specifically Lieutenant Ryan Graves. Now, Lieutenant Graves, if you follow these stories, he's the one that saw the sphere in a cube. That's the UFO. Very, I would say, unique description of a UFO craft, and that is what the New York Times had published and profiled on May 26, 2019. What you're seeing on your screen here is Lieutenant Graves himself, who opened up about his encounters. The Black Vault obviously supports military men and women coming forward with their encounters. And this presentation, I just want to say up front, is actually not against him at all, or his encounter, or if it happened or didn't happen. That's not the case. But rather honing in on what parts you're hearing about, which is more of the confusing part. Now, that article also had mentioned that Lieutenant Graves was going to be premiering in a television series later that week called Unidentified. Any fans of UFOs know? This is the Tom DeLonge and Luis Elizondo and Christopher Mellon series where they appeared on History Channel, now completing their second season, which has fully aired. And Lieutenant Graves was, I believe, in episode number 4. So the New York Times was profiling his appearance and this television show as well. Although they have denied, from what I understand, any connection to unidentified, meaning the New York Times or the journalists who write the articles, they've denied any connection to the series, but they don't waste any opportunities to publicize it. I know that the journalists do have or at least one in particular, Leslie Kean, does have some personal connections to TTSA. And oddly, Tom DeLonge has said that he orchestrated the New York Times writing some or all of their articles. So when you make that type of a claim and you got your television series promptly placed in there, well, it may shed some light on what the motivation is. And I do believe that that has to be pointed out, because I do believe that it also plays into what you're reading and what you're not reading. Now, here is the Freedom of Information Act stuff that I just received. Now, the Department of the Navy, specifically the Naval Safety Center, was where I filed a request to, and here's why. When I started seeing what the drive had accomplished, and kudos to them, I started sniffing around because I wanted to know what the New York Times did to try and verify Lieutenant Graves' sighting, along with others that they profiled as well, which I'm not going to get into. But you guys can read the full article for yourselves in the show notes. If you don't know how to get there, if you're on YouTube, it's below in the description of the video, so it'll link to everything I'm talking about. And if you're listening on the podcast, go to theblackvault.com/show notes, and that will take you right to the show notes page that has all of the links that you can download. Now, here is the Freedom of Information Act letter, as I stated, and the breakdown of what they were giving me. What did I ask for? Well, any and all New York Times related FOIA requests, specifically on UAPs, specifically UFOs, and any that are filed by Leslie Kean, Ralph Blumenthal, or Helene Cooper, the 3 journalists who wrote many of the articles. That was what I was kind of sniffing around. I wanted to see what was there. Did they try it all? And I was happy to find out they did. Here's the actual letter that the New York Times had written looking for, and you can see it here. I'm not going to read the whole letter, but they were looking for all aircraft mishap investigation reports and deck logs from the USS Theodore Roosevelt from January 2015 to March 2015. To clarify, I am not looking for aircraft accident reports. And then, of course, they go into all the legal mumbo-jumbo. I always get a kick out of the standard templates that newspapers use, because most of the time there is about 100 times more language than you actually need. But be that as it may, that's just a FOIA quirk of mine. I believe less is better. But you can download the whole Freedom of Information Act request that the New York Times filed. Here's what's more important. This was the response. Now, the letter itself that the New York Times sent was undated, but we know that it was roughly in the beginning to mid-April 2019 timeframe. So obviously they were going to try and find evidence to support Lieutenant Graves' sighting, because in the article, if you read through it in detail, you'll see that there were hazard reports that were filed, and that's obviously what they were going for. This is the full Freedom of Information Act response letter to the New York Times by the Navy, dated May 29th, 2019, though I do believe that that was an error. I believe that there is a mistake here because it references a May 30th conversation. I point that out just because I'm going to go through the timeline, but that I believe it was a mistake. They probably typed it on the 29th, had a telephone conversation on the 30th, added that line, and then forgot to change this. This was the key part of the letter. Reason is because, thanks to the Navy, they put everything in chronological order on how the Freedom of Information Act request actually came to pass and how it progressed throughout the weeks and months that they processed it. Now, in lieu of reading this entire thing to you, what I did was created a timeline of events table. So if you're watching, here it is. If you're listening, I'm going to read it to you because it makes it a little bit more easier to understand where I'm going with all of this. In April of 2019, we know the New York Times filed the FOIA request. On April 18th, 2019, the Naval Safety Center begins processing. On April 26, 2019, the Naval Safety Center and the New York Times have a telephone call to discuss. May 14th, 2019, New York Times changes the scope of the request for records involving near-miss aerial encounters with unidentified objects, any incidents involving unusual aircraft that were hard to identify or explain, and near misses or dangerous encounters with drones or possible advanced technology being tested by our government or from a foreign country. The New York Times also specified the events involved, then here's a quote, events involved Navy jets in flight and did not occur on board a ship. So for whatever reason, that telephone call caused the New York Times to change the scope of their request. That's actually not uncommon. I do that quite a bit. A lot of times FOIA officers are aiming to help you. So how you worded the request originally might yield nothing. So they say change it and you'll get a couple other things. And they very do want to help versus, completely shut you down. There are exceptions to that. There's some bad apples out there, but for the most part, they want to help. So I'm guessing that conversation had something in it that tipped off the New York Times that they were not going to get information that would support the witnesses that they were about to publish. How do I know? And I'll be honest with you, I don't. That's speculation. But we do know on the timeline, 12 days later, the New York Times just went ahead and published. They never had the final response. But I believe that telephone conversation probably did one of two things. Prompted them to understand they weren't going to get anything, and then forced them to amend the request in the way that I've already read to you in hopes to get something else. Regardless, they dropped the article anyway. They never made reference to the Navy. They never made reference to seeking documents. And they also never made reference to contacting the DOD for comment. Now, I would wish to get the full story to see how the Navy or the DOD would respond from a spokesperson angle. Sadly, the New York Times did not appear to do that. So May 26th, they just published the article anyway. May 30th, 2019, this is key. New York Times discovers there was no supporting evidence or responsive records to their request. So even though I kind of speculate here around the 14th, with the phone call, they were already tipped off, which is why they changed their request. They knew definitively by the 30th that there was absolutely nothing. However, the Navy, according to them in their conversation with the New York Times on the telephone, found 8 other reports. The New York Times asked for and received those on the 30th. Those 8 reports were what the drive broke a year later. For whatever reason, the New York Times read all of them and sat on it. Those documents proved a couple things. One, if you read through them, there's a couple interesting tidbits here and there, but for the most part, they very much resemble terrestrial objects in these cases. Drones, unmanned aerial systems, that type of technology. That's really what is kind of depicted in those 8 different sightings. So about a year prior to the drive breaking that story and getting those documents, the New York Times already had them. They also knew within days of their article being dropped that on an official level, the Navy had absolutely nothing to support those cases. So that's the weird part, because if you're going to give the whole story, because maybe it is a cover-up, maybe the Navy's lying. I've got thousands of examples to show how the military has lied, not only about UFOs, but other things throughout 24 years of filing FOIA requests. So maybe that's what's going on here. So why wouldn't you report that, or at least do a follow-up in the year that would pass before someone else found the records and reported on them and pointed out, hey, the New York Times said that there was this massive sighting wave during this time frame, but we didn't find any records. So the New York Times seemingly sat on that. May 31st, the day after the New York Times found out that they'd had that no evidence, but they had these 8 other reports, Unidentified on the History Channel premiered. And then again, episode 4 profiled Lieutenant Graves. So this isn't against his sighting or his experience, and I do want to stress that because I know that I'll get nasty comments and letters about it. But regardless, though, you start seeing a trend here that the full story was kept from you. Now, if it was 2-week difference, the drive broke the story, then they probably just scooped him. But if you're going to sit on something like that for a year, my guess is that's probably by design, that there was a reason that they were not going to report on it. So fast forward to May 12th, 2020, near a year later, again, that's when the Drive's War Zone breaks the story on those 8 UAP encounters, which it's just been discovered that the New York Times had for a year. They profiled the fact that the New York Times published this massive wave in the 2014-15 timeframe. The Drive said, hey, we didn't find anything. 48 hours later, New York Times then drops a new article. They report on the 8 Navy UAP encounters now. Wow, what a coincidence. The Drive did it. 48 hours later, they went ahead and dropped their article. Here's another key point, though. They said one of the 8 proved their reporting on Lieutenant Graves' sighting. They said that it connected to a 2013 event that was depicted. There was no sphere in a cube by description in there. And they, without explanation, changed Lieutenant Graves' story to occurring in 2013 with no explanation or no correction. Here is how it was told to you on May 26, 2019. Right here it says in late 2014. So you're talking about what? October, November, December. That coincides with the Freedom of Information Act amendment that they filed, changing the time frame to November 2014 to February of 2015 of where they thought documents existed. So that's how they originally reported it. The next year, they said right here, the incident was documented in a report with few details on June 27th, 2013, approximately a year and a half earlier than what they originally reported. Now, I'll get to the whole well, why does this even matter? But again, they're changing their story to fit the documentation that came out. That documentation was this. A couple different pages. There's actually more than this, but I'm showing you these for now. But I do invite you to download the whole thing below. The only part that really matters is this here. And this essentially was the description of the event. Nothing that really coincides with Lieutenant Graves' account at all. So not only is the date wildly different, which could be just a small, memory lapse, so recollected it the wrong way, that's fine. There's nothing that supports what he described, meaning this looked like a completely different case at all, but not to the New York Times. This was documentation to support Lieutenant Graves. Now, I'm not the only one that pointed this out. In fact, a while ago on Leslie Kane's personal Facebook page, somebody had asked her about the discrepancy of the date. Originally reported 2014, yet now you're connecting it to 2013 with no explanation. I'm going to read to you her comment in response on her personal Facebook page. Good questions, Leslie says. As we understand it, the safety officers would sometimes tone down the reports to make them less mysterious. Graves confirmed that this was his incident, and that the dates had been fuzzy for him since this was years ago. Yes, he estimated 2014 in the previous story, but he said it could have been 2013. Now, in Lieutenant Graves' defense, that could absolutely be true. He just didn't remember the date right. I don't have a problem with that. What I do have a problem with is the fact that they're using fuzzy recollection, and the fact that Lieutenant Graves, according to this, said, yeah, it could have been 2013. That could be right. But yet, when you reread the New York Times article, they said this is it. They definitively stated it. Those are two wildly different things. One says it's a possibility, the actual witness, and then it's reported to you that this is it. In my opinion, if that matters to anybody, this report is not Lieutenant Graves's. People that are much smarter than me have looked at this, and there's no indication that this is Lieutenant Graves's sighting. And by people, I say, when I say much smarter than me on this, those that really have dug deep into these encounters from the Roosevelt and the 2014-2015 timeframe, like Dave Beatty out there, who has posted quite a bit. I don't want to speak for him at all, so I would highly recommend you check out his Twitter page. I know that he's sent out some tweets about this, and you can tell he has done an enormous amount of research. One of the tweets that he sent out there was that it just didn't look the same at all. So there's a lot out there to support that this is not connected, but the New York Times is telling you something else. It should be noted, too, that the series Unidentified, when they put Lieutenant Graves on screen, gave you a different time frame for when his Sphere in a Cube event took place. That was in the summer of 2014. So we're kind of jumping around here all over the place, and we don't really know what the right answer is. And that's what's very difficult when we want more answers and we want to push harder. If the reporting and what is being told to us is completely inaccurate, how can we do that? Now, obviously, the last episode, which I've already referred to of this program, was kind of harping on the New York Times as well. And that, again, is just a coincidence, simply because that was 2 months ago. I just haven't been able to record. And these documents, I feel, is worthy of an episode for you guys to really kind of dig deep and see what is going on behind the scenes when you read an article like this, and so on and so forth. This is just a reminder that on July, I believe it was the 23rd, 2020, they had published No Longer in Shadows, Pentagon's UFO unit will make some findings public. And buried in there were the off-world vehicles comments, and then the erroneous attributions, I guess, to Senator Harry Reid that he believed some of these craft were off-world vehicles as well. That is a major bombshell that was corrected within 24 hours. If you're not familiar with that story, that is a really amazing look at how bad reporting can get if you don't take a little bit of time and care. And that may sound harsh, and I know, again, that I'll get letters for this episode, and you'll see some comments on social networking about me harping on the New York Times or the journalists or the military or whatever. Rather, it's not about that. A lot of you may ask, like, so what? And what I see more common than anything else, other than I would say the majority of reactions to articles like this are very much positive. But when I say the majority of what I see from a negative standpoint is, who cares? So what? Like, why do we care? The New York Times is profiling UFOs. And that's why we should care. Because the New York Times has an incredible reach. And if they have the ability to bring people in to start asking questions, people that'll take part in protests or going into their congressmen or senators or representatives and saying, look, I read about this in the New York Times. This is something very serious. This is something that's not to be laughed at. If you do not have solid reporting for an extraordinary story, it will fall apart. Things like this demand extraordinary evidence because it's extraordinary. If you start making these types of claims and you throw it on the front page of the New York Times, and then part of it starts to fall apart, does that mean that people are going to take you seriously? When they start digging in deep, when they go, wow, Senator Harry Reid said he believed these are off-world vehicles crashing here, that's amazing. And you Google and you come up with, that meanie John Greenwald's channel and realize, no, that's not it. Or they revisit the article and they realize, wait a minute, where's this attribution to Harry Reid? And then they see the fine print at the bottom that was removed within 24 hours. The damage had already been done, by the way, on that specific article because so many people copy. I call it copy and paste journalism. They take what was published by the New York Times and they put it into their own article. They jumble up the words, of course, and they make it their own. They call back to the New York Times, but they say Harry Reid said these were off-world vehicles. Some of those periodicals changed their story after the New York Times did. Others did not. So you have this domino effect of bad information. Take it to the next level. So then all of a sudden you start going into your representatives. People aren't watching those articles every day. meaning refresh. Is there a correction? Let me refresh again. Is there a correction? People don't do that. The majority of people are going to read those articles in the first 24 hours. That's going to sink into them, and then they're going to act. And I believe that that's why this is so important, is that when you look at history and the absolute awful reporting done by the mainstream media over the decades, why are we now just happy that they're covering it in a so-called serious way, but they just don't care about the details? Isn't that the same thing as a joke or some kind of humorous take? Or, you know, a lot of I would say a lot of people out there are pretty excited about the way that the media handles UFOs at this point, and me included. I'm right there with you. Some outlets. But when things aren't accurate, it needs to be pointed out. You need to hear when things are wrong. Why? Because the things that are right tell the story the way we need it to be told. And that is in the way of the truth. That is in the way that we demand. That is in the way that we deserve. Now, some may think I'm just going too far and I'm harping on them too much, and maybe you're right. But in the end, you want people to take this seriously. Because if the New York Times is just catering to the people that are okay with just being mediocre in the coverage, that may sound harsh, but that's what we're doing here. We're saying, at least I've seen it anyway, in reactions to videos like this, we're okay with mediocrity because the New York Times is covering UFOs. That's what we need. No, it's not. The topic deserves much more scrutiny, but careful and accurate scrutiny. If you just kind of do whatever, throw whatever you want out there, and hopes that your, core audience will just kind of blindly believe it and not double check, well, then you shouldn't be the New York Times with the standard that they try and project. You're a blog. You're catering to a certain group, and that's it. But the topic deserves more. With Senator Marco Rubio putting essentially his booty on the line here, saying that there's an interest on his end and that the Senate is going to start pushing, they're not going to go to, Joe Blow's blog to try and figure out the truth, because they do use media sources. Their staffers use media sources. That's where they get a lot of their stuff. We all know that, depending upon the issue, that's what they do. They go out and they try and trust good reporting to bring in information to the Senate staffers to then push for that more classified information behind the scenes. But the staffers will give them a groundwork to look at. And if that groundwork is shoddy and mediocre and falls apart, like Senator Harry Reid saying off-world vehicles, like things happening, then dates change, witnesses aren't backed up, there's absolutely nothing. When they start looking into that, that will affect their mindset on how hard they're going to push. If you had stellar reporting, let's say The Drive, that gives you kind of the truth with documentation and backs up what they say, and when stuff isn't backed up, they write about it, which is what you need. They don't ignore it. They don't just change their reporting in hopes that you won't notice. They point it out. That's the type of standard that you need. And that is why evidence is so important. I think it's fantastic military men and women come forward, but if it's just their testimony, we need something else. Because when they tell you that there's documented evidence there, if they said, we filed a flight safety hazard report, part of the story is that report, right? I think we can all agree with that. If the Navy says it's not there, that's part of the story. Whether it be a cover-up or whether it be the witnesses lying or maybe a little bit of both, you guys deserve to hear that full story to push harder and find out which is the truth. And yet the New York Times decided you shouldn't hear any of it, and only decided to go ahead and write about those 8 reports within 48 hours of The Drive doing it, and then all of a sudden, their witness from a year prior was backed up by a document that didn't match up with the description, the characteristics of the encounter, or the date. But the New York Times was probably hoping you wouldn't ask, and buried deep within a personal Facebook page, not the New York Times, but one of the freelance journalists who wrote the article, they put the accusation that the Navy changes those reports to make them less mysterious. That is a heck of an allegation to make. And if there's any truth to that, which I would be on board with, I believe wholeheartedly in a cover-up of the UFO topic, there's enough verifiable evidence to prove that. But if you're going to make that claim, you got to back it up. You can't bury it to your core audience on your personal Facebook page, but not present evidence. That's not a harp against her personally, but rather something that if you are going to explain away what happened by saying that the Navy covered it up, they just changed the wording to make it less interesting, less ominous, less mysterious, less whatever, you need to back it up. I hope I'm not alone wanting that evidence. I hope you all understand why I push and push and push. I'm here to show you both sides of it, the stuff that really is fascinating and supports that there is a cover-up, the actual evidence to do that, but also sometimes when it's not there, because you guys deserve to hear that too. Lots is coming to this channel, I promise you. Like I told you in the beginning, there is light at the end of the tunnel. I'm just crossing my fingers it's not a train. And this is John Greenwald Jr. signing off. We'll see you next time.